Tea time, yeah, making a difference, one cup at a time. Tea time, yeah. So be sure to grab your tea, grab a seat, and tune in to Miss Liz. Tea time, making a difference, one cup at a time. Tea time, yeah. Tea time, time.
Well, welcome to Tea Time. That's right, Miss Liz is back, and you know what that means. It means it's tea time to serve real life stories and words. That's what Miss Liz serves. I do not serve a beverage on Tea Time with Miss Liz. Yes, we do drink tea once in a while from time to time, but we serve a different type of tea on this platform. So before we get started, we're going to get you over to Miss Liz's YouTube channel and ring that little doorbell so you can see these tea times at any time, morning, afternoon, evening, or you can join the live streams when we're going live. And if you have any questions or comments, you can put those into the section, or you can actually send Miss Liz your questions through my Facebook page. So tonight I have Gary Wietgrefe in the house, and he's going to be sharing his see your name at streamyard.com. Please be advised that the content brought forward for any team, however, may bring forward dialogues and opinions that are not representative of my platform. The facts and information participants are responsible for using their good judgment and take is an inventor with 6 patents, internationally published researcher, military intelligence veteran, developer, social tech explorer, cyclist, hiker, outdoorsman, and an author of including 2 in his Relating to Ancient series, Cultures and the Mysterious Agent Changing It, and Learning as It Influenced to the North Pole, Alaska. Wietgrefe released his first travel adventure. He and his wife Patricia live and travel from South Dakota. So let me get Gary in here. Let's spill some tea.
Well, thank you, Liz. Thank you for that good introduction.
Well, it is a pleasure to have you here. And you know what? I've had Santa Claus on Tea Time, so now we're going to talk about the North Pole, on how people ride the bike there.
Well, yeah, North Pole, Alaska.
Right? Miss Liz has everybody on Tea Time. So Gary, let's get started with you. Who was Gary as a little boy, and who's Gary now?
I was one of 7. I was the second, actually, of 7 siblings. I have an older sister, and started in a one-room school, the 1st through 4th grade, and in fact, my latest book, Humor and Learning from a One-Room School, is one of the things we'll visit with about tonight, because I basically put them together memories of being in the 1st through 4th grade, and some of the funny things and some of the stupid things I did as a little kid.
And who are you now, Gary, as a grown man?
Well, I'm retired 12 years. I've had a very good life. I don't know how many countries I've been in. My wife and I retired 12 years ago and were able to travel. We actually sold our house. We had an RV for a couple of summers. We did the east and the west coast of the U.S. Our son lived in Australia. He's a doctor in Australia. So we went over there and spent a couple winters, which is their summer, of course, and came back and traveled the U.S. We have an orphan girl in Uganda that we helped sponsor her school, and so we went over and seen her, and just have been. We spent a lot of time in Mexico. We like wintering down there, but just a South Dakota farm kid that has been had a very fortunate life.
So Gary, let's talk about your book. Let's get right into your book, because I found out that there's lots of humor in there. There's also, what did I write down here? There's some bullying in there, jealousy, discipline, heartbreak. There's a lot going on in that book.
There is. I have it up here. Humor and Learning in a One-Room School. And first, I want to compliment my sketch artist that she was from South Carolina. I had met her on a presentation, and I liked her simple feeling sketches. And so I asked her after I'd finished. By the way, Humor and Learning in a One-Room School is a 1,400 line, 350 stanza rhyming poem. So it's not more than 18 words per 4-line stanza. So it's a very simple poem written that a fourth grader could read, but it's entertaining that senior citizens, especially if they've gone to smaller, even one-room schools. Our daughter just finished reading it and called me this afternoon and was cracking up at some of the things that she's her daughter, and it was just surprised her. Some of the things, the pranks that happened and things like that in school, that even though she had gone to a small school, she hadn't realized that some of the things that a different generation experienced that she didn't.
Well, when it's a smaller school, there's more fun, I find. I come from a small community too, and we had I think 15 kids in one classroom, and then as the years passed, I think that we had 30 in the classroom. We didn't have very big classrooms.
Well, that was actually pretty big, because I was the only.
Oh, really?
I was the only student in my the first 4 years. First,
wow.
second, third, and fourth grade. I was the only first, second, third, and fourth grader, and the most we had, I think, was 13 in 8 grades, and that was only because my younger brother and 3 other kids his age started the first grade when I was in the fourth. So we had a huge first grade class.
Wow. So how was that for you, being the only student?
Well, I didn't know if I was learning fast or slow. I at some point I realized I was actually learning something, because we were, my parents were very poor, and we lived in 4 room, basically a tar paper house. Some people call it a shack, but and my mom babysit 2 kids from the teacher that served the school, one-room school just down the road from us. And so we just learned to play with each other, and didn't have books. So I didn't know the ABCs when I went to school. In fact, I don't think I could recite them by the time I changed schools. My grandma died, and we had to move about 120 miles to our grandpa's farm to help him when I was halfway through the first grade. And my second teacher, I started learning numbers better, and ABCs and things like that better. But I think I remember so much because I couldn't read. We didn't have books at home or anything like that, just a few toys. And so I think my mind developed a little bit different in that I remember things, minute details of stories, and that's really what's in the book.
So your book is based on a poem?
It is. The book is a poem. Actually, the first half of it is a poem. It's 350 stanzas, 4-line stanzas rhyming. And in that, I tell stories of basically before I was in the first grade through the fourth grade. And so these stories involve everything like, let me back up just a little bit. The other half of the book, I should explain, is explanations of the first half. Because
that's pretty different, eh?
My sketch artist, and she basically, I sent her the poem, and she basically drew sketches based on that particular stanza. And so there's just fun. I put a lot of my little pictures when I was a kid and things like that in there. But my sketch artist just went on and found lots of different things to sketch on. And she said, but Gary, when she finished, she goes, you really need a glossary or commentary, because students now use smart boards or whiteboards. They have no idea what a blackboard is. All right, it's just the opposite of what they're teaching.
Yeah.
Right? We had a ceramic crock for water in school. The ceramic crock, what is that? Outhouses. We didn't have running water, telephone in school, or anything like that. And so I explained not only the things in school, but I was a farm kid, which went back and forth to school, and we had farm chores and things like that. So I needed to explain some of the things I did when I was in first through fourth grade that had nothing to do with school, but it was part of the poem.
Well, I think it also brings back the history, right? People, I think the children reading that today would appreciate what they have in a classroom.
Well, this book is less than a month old, actually about 3 weeks old. And locally, I attend the farmers market. I'm the only, we'll call it, artist at the farmers market. The rest, the other 40 booths or whatever, sell food and frozen goods, canned goods, things like that, fresh vegetables. But, I think a lot of people come to my booth because you can only talk so long about broccoli. It's just, they just migrate to my booth, and so I get to visit with them. Well, it so happened that this last Saturday was the second time I had my book at the market, and three ladies come by, chatted, and they go, "Oh, this nice visit," and I found out that they were a second, third, and fourth grade teachers. They weren't related. They just worked at the same school and were friends. And Saturday morning farmers market was one of their outings, and so they said, "Oh, you know what?" I told them a little bit about this book, and they said, "Well, how about we buy one, and we'll just share it in school." Well, before they left, but they not only bought two books so they could read it to their class. That was the plan. Read it to their classes, and then they said, "Okay, we'll coordinate a plan." And so on the same day, we'll have you come in after we've read the poem to the kids. We'll have you come in and surprise the kids as a local author of this book. And so I go, that sounds like fun.
See, you just never know what happens, right?
No, you have to
What
put
broccoli
yourself out
does,
there.
right?
You put yourself out there to, I don't know, hundreds of people. And so both volunteering in your interviews and things like that. And I think it's just, it's so good to be visiting with somebody like you that does put themselves out there.
Yeah. And you just never know what you get when you go for broccoli.
There you go. You don't know, that's for sure. You might end up with Brussels sprouts because you didn't know the difference. So.
Right? So how long did it take you to write the book, Gary?
Besides being an author, by the way, this is my 10th book. I put on there 7. One I have unpublished, another one, this one just came out, and another one is strictly a poem book. So I do write poetry. So to answer your question specifically, this 350 stanzas was, and it was actually more, was written in 2 settings because I just started rolling, and it was actually 2 different poems. One was just the first grade in stories, and the other one was second, third, and fourth. And I decided to tie them together, which meant I had to throw out some stanzas and put some transitional stanzas in there, but all with the same, basically same format. Lines average 3.3 words. And so it's very short. It's just simple little stories, like as if I was a first, second, third, or fourth grader telling these stories.
I like that, because it's good for seniors as well, especially
Yes.
seniors that have dementia, right? And
It is.
Alzheimer's.
It would bring back memories to them. Like I said, our daughter read it just the first time today. It's a very quick read, and part of the reason I wrote it with fairly large, for example, I have at most, I think it's 4 or 5 stanzas per page, and so it's fairly large print. I don't know if you can
that's
see
good. Yeah.
large print, because if you're trying to write for a young audience, they like larger letters. I did, I know. And I have my wife's aunt, we went and visited her, and she gets books every week from the library. And she can no longer, I said, I got a hardcover, I'll just mail you a hardcover of one of my books. And she goes, "Oh, Gary, I can't hold hardcover books anymore. And of course, she's a little bit harder to see, so she likes large print. And so she likes paperback, large print. And so um, before I'd actually formatted this book, I kept that in mind and basically designed it so that not only the young kids, but also seniors like her can sit in her armchair and just have a good, funny, humorous, quick read.
In paper, we never really talked about this. Paperback is easier to hold, right, than the hard books.
Well, if you think of elderly ladies, and you take a book that's a pound and a half or 2 pounds, they love reading. They have sight and intellect to read, but they can't be physically overwhelmed by holding a book up here like this. And so um, I hadn't thought of it until she brought it up.
Yeah. And the large print is easy too. I find when the print is too small, I get overwhelmed. I'm just like, oh, I got to read all this.
Yes, the other thing that I especially, probably the most prevalent in this book, is that uh, the stanzas are short, the lines are short, there's lots of white space. And so it's filled in with photos and sketches, personal photos that tied in with that particular story. So it's 350 stanzas, but there's some stanzas are, maybe a story within 8 lines, or one or two stanzas, and then other ones might go on 3 or 5 or 10 stanzas at the most to tell a story or an incident.
So in this book, Gary, you have some bullying going on, some jealousy, some discipline, some heartbreak. So what grades was all that happening in grade 1, grade 2, 3, 4?
The whole series, because I use different stories from different uh, incidents. For example, the bullying when I was in first grade. I was the only kid in my class. I go to school, and it was there was 5 older boys, and the oldest next to me was in the 3rd grade. But they, during recess, would go out and walk around the sloughs and the fields, hayland, looking for tracking wildlife and stuff like that. Uh, and they wouldn't invite me along because I was just a little stupid little kid. And so, in today's terms, that would be considered bullying.
Yeah.
Within a month and a half or so, by pheasant season, which would have been October, middle of October of '59, they invited me along. So I get to tromp around in the fields and check for pheasant tracks and rabbit tracks and coon and fox and all that kind of thing. And so I was part of the group by 2 months later. All right. So that's a bullying story. There's another one that I sent a review to my sister before I put this out. She's a year older than I am, 11 months older actually. And she called me as soon as she finished reading it. She goes, "Gary, I'm so sad. I mean, I feel bad that I never told you about that. I never told you about the TV in the attic of the one-room school." And I go, "Well, I wrote it. It was funny. I didn't figure it out until I was in the 2nd grade. But the story goes that all the kids in school, we couldn't go out because it was blizzarding. So we couldn't go outside. And the kids ganged up together without my knowledge and would climb up the tiny little room. It basically held desks where they used for storage. And the boys had stacked desk on top of desk and climb up there and lifted the attic hole and would look in the attic hole and say, 'Oh yeah, this is on TV.' And the other kids, 'Oh, can I see?' And so they would come down. The next one would be helped up, and they would never let me go up because I was just a stupid little kid. And so my sister was a part of the group. She was in the 2nd grade. She was a part of the group, but always kept the secret because they said, 'Don't you tell Gary.' And so my sister would not tell, And so she was bullied into not telling me. And finally, we went to a different school. And sometime during the 2nd grade, I figured out there was no school, there was no TV there.
Wow. Let's talk about TVs back in the day, because
Yeah,
I remember where we had to put the SOS pads for the rabbit ears at Grandma and Grandpa's house, right? And we
yeah.
only had the three channels. If you wanted to change the channel, you had to get up and change it. There was no remote controls back then. So,
Boy, you lived in a populated area when you had three different stations. We had one at first and eventually got a couple of them, but again, rural area. We got our first TV in for Christmas, 1956, and how I remember is basically I was only 3 years old, but my mother would tell this story that she was. She graduated high school at 19 because she had to quit during the war to help on the farm and stuff. And then she went to a 10-week teacher's training course. And so she taught for 1 year. As a 19-year-old to a 20-year-old, she was a teacher in 1950. They got married in 51. My sister was born in 52. I was born in 53. My brother 54. Another brother 55. TV 56. Another brother 57. So from 1950 to 57, I can just remember 56 was the TV year.
well, and those are the good old days. Like my grandpa used to always say, like when we got the TV, right? If you didn't like channel one, you could go to channel two. If you didn't like channel two, you go to channel three. And if you didn't like channel three, you could go to bed.
That's hey, there. You had a good grandpa. It kind of reminds me, Liz, of the story of my brother. My youngest brother is quite a bit younger than I am. He was born in 66. Um, and he has two boys. And so when the boys were young, um, they were watching TV, and my brother picks up the remote and he goes, "Look at Luke and Ann. When I was your age, I had to walk over to the TV and turn channels."
My grandpa had us on rotate. Okay, you turned it the last time. Okay, your turn now. Your turn.
Oh, that was like a chore. All right.
Yeah, and it was either Wheel of Fortune that we watched, or it was hockey. And it was always fun to watch hockey with Grandma and Grandpa because they had two opposite teams. So you knew when their
Oh,
teams were playing each other, it got pretty feisty in the house. It was
yes,
like
yes.
Grandma's side of the living room or Grandpa's side, and you didn't argue with it.
Now,
You
did they play hockey or just like to watch hockey?
just watch hockey. My grandma
Okay,
was Boston Bruins and my grandpa was Montreal Canadiens.
sure.
So it got pretty feisty sometimes in the house.
Oh, yeah. That's pretty neat. Pretty neat. And you didn't interrupt the
No.
game.
And if they scored, well, if you were sitting on the other side, you better not be cheering.
Oh, that's neat. That's neat. Isn't it fun to think back and I you didn't say what age you were, but uh, preschool or even in school, younger grades in school, you can think back with humor. It's not like you remember the bad times. It was the funny things. You remember the grandpa and grandma stories.
Yeah.
It's fun, and it's fun to write about those things.
And I think we need more stories like that, like yours, Gary, out there. Bring back some history. I love history. I could talk about history all day. Everybody knows Miss Liz likes to talk about the old stuff. Uh, I collect teapots, right? And they're vintage, and the stories behind who made those teacups and all of that stuff.
And
So,
how they got to where they got, and how they ended up in your possession. You'd mentioned
yeah.
at some point that you do volunteer work and things like that, and that people just know you as Miss Liz's Tea Time, and so they have a set of tea glasses, teacups, whatever, that they certainly don't want to see destroyed or just take to a local flea market or a Goodwill store, and instead they think of you, which to me that brought life, meaning your character out to me, and it does to others, I'm sure.
So, Gary, tell me a few of your childhood stories in this classroom because you had some jealousy going on. So, who were you jealous of?
Um, oh, geez. I think one that I just picked up, I made a little note this today just before I went in there, just so that you could read this, because like a heartbreak story was a girl, I was in third grade and she died in my class. And I was jealous of the kids that when we were playing Fox and Goose, I was, you know, I was the slowest one, and I could never catch them. So I was always jealous that they could do more. Or one kid, I say, told a story about how we were swinging on the swing, and one of the kids said that he made a loop completely around. Well, I was jealous of that, but at the same time, was he telling the truth, or was he just pulling my leg? And so maybe I should just read a few sentences or a few stanzas, if that would be okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Uh, Teacher's finger curled around tiny chalk. Her nail screeched, stopped our talk. Frost on windows, magical design. When will noon come? It's about time. 4 grade lessons done by noon. One more session, get to play soon. Cold room won't spoil my sandwich meat, nor wormy crab apple as my treat. 8 wormy crab apples every day. Apples about a ton. Always one away from a good one. Apples kept the doctor away, no matter how I faked. Ate from baby food jar, mashed, sauced, and baked. So these are the kinds of stories and rhyme that I put together. Let me go to, let's see, how about 30? Okay, here's one about the blackboard. On blackboard, I drew white, colored chalk for those who write. I use pencil, others use pens. Teacher thought I'd make a mess. But I got to sharpen pencils every day. That was my plan for in-school play. Every crank turn, sharpened pencil tip. I had to learn when to quit. Cranking cravings, wanted to do more. Dump pencil shavings on the floor. My standard pencil was a number 2. B for art. Teacher, not you. I wasn't good keeping in lines, but did what I could in set time. And just, things like that. So
I like the flow of it, Gary. It's really playful.
that's the goal. That's the goal. So again, whether you're 90 years old and sitting in your rocking chair, or you're I had a second grader, and I didn't know him because he was a pretty big kid. His parents came to the farmers market on Saturday, and they looked at this book and some of my other books, and they picked it up, and the son looked at the back of the book, and he was reading quite slow. He was like a pretty big kid. So I was guessing, 4th, 5th grade, and it seemed like a really sharp kid. And the mom says, "Oh, should we get this for you?" He goes, "Oh, I would rather read the one Destination North Pole one, Mom." And I go, "What? What age are you? What grade are you in? 2nd?" And I go, "Geez, that's pretty good. He can read the back of my book." And so he was big 2nd grader. And so the folks not only bought Destination North Pole, because I have a YouTube video that my grandnephew did of all my wife's and my a bike trip up there with all the animals and the moose, the bear, and all that kind of thing in it. And so I thought, wow, this will really be encouraging for the kids. Even if you can't read the book, you'll at least see the video and want to read or at least hear some of the stories. But I am convinced that particular 2nd grader, with good parenting and obviously good teachers, would be able to read my one-room school book.
Let's talk about the North Pole, because when I seen that, I was like, oh, I got somebody else that went to the North Pole. I had Santa Claus earlier this year. Now I have somebody who rode a bike to the North Pole. And some of the animals, and the video is really amazing. I watched the video on YouTube, so everybody go and check that out on the YouTube channel. Really, truly amazing, Gary, what you've done. But what got you to ride a bike to the North Pole?
Well, let me just pull out a couple here. Where is it at? Let me grab these. I had written 2 books, Learning as it Influenced the 21st Century, and Culture and the Mysterious Age, relating to ancient culture and the mysterious age of changing it. They're mind-bending books, meaning that they were, in my sense, they were fun to write because I tried to figure out why culture changes so fast. The last half of the 20th century and the 21st, where historically, you like history, I like history, historically, cultures or societies change very slow. But as we traveled around the world, we've seen that cultures change fast. Well, the same thing happened. People would say, yeah, kids, the way they learn now is completely different the way I learned. I would go out with my aunt and uncle or my grandma and my dad, and we would have to do this and this and this. And so I go, okay. So I wrote the book relating to ancient learning, how people used to learn compared to how they learn now. So anyway, my mind was tired after writing, 2 books over 700 pages. And I asked my wife, I finished the book tour in Mexico. And I asked my wife, I said, Patricia, always wanted to do a long bicycle ride. And we'd done a few, overnight rides. And I asked her to go along. And she says, no, I'll drive. And I go, well, I'm thinking about biking up to our niece and nephew's place in North Pole, Alaska. It's up by Fairbanks. And so my mind was tired, but I go, wow, I'm retired, 65 years old. It's, I just celebrated my 65th birthday, and I go, well, I'll fly home. And within a week, I was on my 10-year-old bicycle, bags loaded. My wife came back a couple days later, and she stayed back for our Memorial Day, the end of the month, end of May, because she had lost her older brother. And so I left on May 20th, thinking it would take me 2 months to bike from Pierce, South Dakota to North Pole, Alaska. It's 3,000 miles or just shy of 5,000 kilometers. And so I had no idea if I was going to make it or not. And so within a week, I started pedaling. But before I left, it was just me. I wasn't going to tell anybody, other than my wife and kids, that I was doing it, because they had no idea. It's quite a challenge, for any age. But friends found out, and other family, and they said, Gary, you got to do a blog. Put a blog on your website and just do a blog. And after I started going, I was doing it every day from my iPhone, because that's all I carried. And I would tell, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs of what happened that day on the blog. And then I realized, you know what? I think all they wanted to know is where I was going to get killed or where I ended my ride, because there's no way he's going to go 3,000 miles up to northern Alaska.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to get there?
40 days. I thought it would take me 2 months, but I left on May 20th. And the reason was the longest day of the year is June 20th. Okay, summer solstice. So if I'm in northern Canada, say the Yukon, in June, it's light out at midnight. And since we weren't planning on camping, I was going to bike until my wife found a clean bed. And that's what we did. We never camped once, never slept in the car. I biked until she found a place where there was a motel, which was rare up there, work camps, bed and breakfast, Airbnbs, just whatever she could find. And so that's the reason I made more miles than I had anticipated. I got there June 30th, averaging 75 miles a day for 40 days.
That's quite a distance for a bike ride.
It is, my longest is actually in Saskatchewan. And by the way, that's why I call it 5,000 kilometers by bicycle, because most of my ride, of course, was in Canada. I went through the Dakotas up to Saskatchewan, and then north of Regina, I started heading northwest into Alberta. I didn't want to go through Calgary, Alberta, or Calgary or Edmonton. And so I went between the two, Wetaskiwin, and I headed up into the Yukon, of course, corner of British Columbia. And then, good share of the time, 15-20% of the time was in the Yukon, which is not many towns, and certainly a distance between location. But my longest ride actually was fully loaded before my wife caught up with me, was 166 miles. So that would be like 267 kilometers or something like that in one day. And then my shortest happened to be in the Yukon. It was only like 12 or 15 miles, say 20 or 25 kilometers, something like that. And the reason was my wife found a lodging, two little towns close together. So it was kind of like a break day. I just had to do that.
Today is going to be easy day.
Yeah, an easy day, fill the car with gas, get some supplies, whatever.
So have you ever had anybody reach out to you, Gary, and say, have you met Santa Claus in person at the North Pole?
They asked because I'd be surprisingly how many people. We live in a town with an Air Force base right outside of town. And a lot of people that have come to my farmers market booth and have bought my books have been to the North Pole, the town of North Pole, because they lived in Fairbanks or near Fairbanks, or North Pole was between their base and Fairbanks. And so some of them actually stayed as married couples in North Pole. So had I ever, yes, they have, but it's been people that, two things. One, yeah, sure, you've been to the North Pole. Like, you can't bike there, it's all ice. And I go, well, not that North Pole. It became, when I decided to name the book, I had different names for the book, and this is obviously my working copy, but Destination North Pole. I go, well, my destination was North Pole, Alaska. So, okay, it's kind of like a play on words, and you always want a hook in your book, especially in your title. So that was kind of my hook to get people to pick up the book.
Yeah. Well, and you always have that person that sees the cover and says, does the North Pole really exist? You know, because there's some people out there that don't even think North Pole exists. And it does, right?
The surprising thing, I think, to a lot of people, one, is there's a town on North Pole. Number two, there's two North Poles. One is in Colorado, west of Colorado Springs, and the other one is in Alaska, that I know of, the towns.
And there might be another one out there.
There sure could be. I'm not an expert at North Pole towns, you know.
That Santa Claus, he's all over. He's got a lot of North Pole.
You're going to have to have a Santa Claus. I mean, this guy knows everything. And so the other thing, they go, yeah, North Pole, like, they don't know North Pole moves. And I go, yeah, it's moved like 1,000 miles since I was born. So yeah, it keeps shuffling around.
Right. Well, we keep all shifting around, like with all the movement and all the slides and everything out there. Like, you just never know where you're gonna land.
The older you get, the more stuff shifts around. I'll just put it that way.
Right. You just start to shift when you get older.
Well, it's going to someplace I hadn't planned on going, but it doesn't matter wherever you journey, whether it's personal or physically, or mentally. It's always fun to explore something new.
Yeah. So Gary, let's get into your two. You gave me three amazing words. So you gave me rural, research, and resources. Why'd you give me 3 R's?
I'm a rural kid. I made my living in agriculture, and I, went to one-room schools. It was rural. And the other thing, I think that I put research in there because I always had a desire to try to figure things out. And I ended up internationally researching for 15 years with the University of Uladog in Bursa, Turkey. That's a whole nother story. And so I did international research when the Soviet Union collapsed. You see a millet book. Let's see, it's over here. A millet book that I'd written in 1990. It's how to produce this ancient grain of millet, which now is considered a health food, although a lot of people know it as birdseed. But it's a very, very healthy grain. Cook it like rice. Well, anyway, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 and abandoned all state farms in Mongolia. And a Swiss aid organization thereafter went in to help the people of Mongolia, because there's only 3% of the whole country is farmland, and the Soviet farms had been set up in the valleys where they irrigated, but they had no fuel, they had no equipment, they couldn't keep the irrigating running, and so the people were really hungry. And what they had done is, because they had gone through pretty much every type of government in the 20th century. For example, Mongolia ended a 300-year dynasty, the beginning of the 20th century, around 1910, something like that. They were under socialism for a while. They were under Buddhist theocracy, Tibetan theocracy. They were under Chinese control for a while. They were under Soviet socialism, then communism, and by 1992, democracy, and had a stock market. So the point is that Mongolians could not rely on government for anything. They had to eat, they had to have clothing, and it was up to them and their family to do it. And they went back to eating what they've always eaten for thousands of years, 10,000 or more years. Millet, because it's very, very drought tolerant and the most drought tolerant grain, and would grow in high elevations. And uh, uh, they drank camel's milk and used hides. That was, and tea. They made tea out of camel's milk and sometimes milk. So the point is, the Swiss aid organization went over to help them, flew to the U.S. to try to learn something about raising this grain. The guy ran across my book in the University of Minnesota. A library called me, and unfortunately we couldn't meet because of a winter storm. But I ended up sending that book, and was in effect I'm an agronomist, so I was a consultant basically for the University of Mongolia, and I sent varieties of millet that I thought would work in Mongolia over there, and we had a student doing her master's degree do research, and so that was never published publicly, but it was good data. So about 2-3 years ago, I summarized it into a research paper of what Mongolians went through for government, as well as the 20th century history of food production. So I go a long story, but I like research, and so from research, I like to help people. And then the other R was resources, and uh, I have resources that, in this case, Mongolians didn't have. I knew varieties that I thought I knew were developed in the high plains of Nebraska and worked in northeast Colorado, and so higher elevations, similar to the elevations in Mongolia. And then when I looked at the geography, I go, yeah, and millet, because it's photosensitive, will move north. In fact, there's a Millet, Alberta, by the way, a town, Millet, Alberta. And so I knew it would move to that latitude. And so it turns out that the 3 varieties that I sent were the 3 highest varieties in the trials. And they had 2 varieties from Mongolia and 1 from Russia, the Siberia, that they used. And so resources, I, again, have resources that if I can help somebody out, I try to do it.
I think research is really deeply important in today's world. I find that we're not doing enough research, right? We're just giving the, yeah, that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. I strongly encourage people to research and get involved and get educated, right?
Yep, absolutely. Excuse me. Um, for example, I had an opportunity to go to Turkey on a month-long tour with Rotary International,
Oh,
and I was the farm guy. We had a doctor and an attorney and an accountant and 5 of us, and so we were touring Turkey, and I was always going to the agricultural businesses. And one day, the nursing, she was a nurse practitioner. She had lined up a tour of the university, and they had a new nursing program there, and it was the newest agricultural college in Turkey. And so we were taken there, and I was, of course, going with the agricultural agronomy group. And I had done some research on minimum tillage and conservation, soil and water conservation. And I was asked to speak that afternoon for a master's degree class on conservation, because Turkey has a terrible erosion problem. And so that started a 15-year research project with University of Uludağ in Bursa, Turkey. And so again, like Mongolia, in the late 90s, I sent millet varieties over to Turkey, and they did the research over 3 to 4 years. And I could write English better than they, and international journals are published in English. And so we would do the research. They would do the research. I would help summarize it and put it into a research paper. And we have it in a number of journals around the world. And then they started other projects with peas and other crops, which I consulted with them. And then I've done some forage soybeans. Before the 1930s, all the soybeans in the U.S. were basically raised for forage. And so I started a forage soybean research project with Mongolia also. So it's just a way of helping people out.
so Gary, I did some homework on you, and I found that you have 6 patents out there. So what did you patent? Because I looked at the images and I was like, is this a machine? Like,
Well, okay. The last 10 years of my career, um, uh, I'll just back up. Soybean seed in the US and Canada were primarily handled, almost exclusively handled in paper bags. When new varieties come out, they were put in 50-pound paper bags. And um, the bags would go to waste. If farmers, they would blow away, farmers have to burn them. They come on a wooden pallet. And so in 1997, me and two farmers and our soybean product manager and a guy that I was working with, uh, we came up with this idea of handling it in bulk, but it had to be identity preserved. Long story short, uh, I thought it would take me 10 years to develop this project across the US and Canada. And I was, yeah, I did. And so what I developed was the equipment, meaning I talked to our equipment people what they needed to keep the quality of soybean from getting damaged, the seed getting damaged, what they required for identity preserved different varieties. And we developed this system, and then I would inspect equipment in the US and Canada that met our standards. And then our competitors picked it up, and so I developed that in the US and Canada and finished up in my last project was introducing it to Argentina. Well, in the meantime, I seen a need for delivery systems closer to the farmers. And so I did a design patent on a piece of equipment that would identity preserve the seed and deliver it to farmers that way without damage. And so there's some that involved some engineering. So 4 other patents involved the engineering of how to make that work and the electronics of it to identity preserved by individual. And then since I already was working with patent attorneys and doing my job for years, I had thought of what a waste that all grain has to be dried down, especially corn, has to be dried down and then rehydrated to use for food or especially ethanol, with 40% of the U.S. corn going to ethanol. I go, that's crazy. Okay,
yeah.
And so I developed a patent on how to take standing corn without adding additional water, just adding some enzymes, yeast, and some other things. Take a standing field of corn and in 24 to 72 hours convert it into a biofuel, water, and solids. I could separate it. And so that was my last patent. It was actually finally issued 2 years after I retired because patents take a long, long time to develop. But just to finish up this project, that development of that identity preserved system saves today in the US and Canada about 100 million paper bags per year.
Wow.
Per year. That's how big an influence just one, but not, I can't say I'm just me because I worked with I had 300 people in the US that I worked with to develop, to get this spread out, and I was the person that would go around and help figure out financing and, the type of equipment that would work for them. But that's the impact that a project can make when you're using paper bags. You think nothing of it because that's what you want. But, I encourage people to use their imagination to come up with other things. Whether it's patentable or not is one thing. There's a lot of people get confused between patents and inventions. I have inventions that are not patented, and I have patents that aren't implemented as people would call invention, meaning only parts of it have been implemented. And so, for example, when I went to Destination North Pole, I'll just give an example. Went to North Pole. I, on long distance bicycle rides before that, I always got sore wrists, 25, 30 miles, my wrists would get sore. And so I knew that every day I would be fighting just my sore wrists. And so the day before I left, it was a Saturday, I went down to the local hardware store And the bike stores had sold me palm pads, gloves with palm pads and little pads on the end of my handlebars and tilt handlebar and stuff like that. So I went to the local hardware store, took my old bike stem, found a piece of PVC, went to the bike store, got some padded tape, wrapped it up, mounted it on my bicycle, and went 3,000 miles, 5,000 kilometers, and never once, not one day, did I have a sore wrist. So that's an invention, all right? And so I go, I'm 65 years old. I don't want to go hassle with patent attorneys and things like that. So I said, okay, I will put it in the book. I will write it in the book. And I made a YouTube video on wrist support bar. So once it's out in the public, nobody else can patent it, and anybody can make it freely for like $30.
Wow. See, and that's the difference, right? Is because I always wanted to know the difference between an invention and a patent, and you just shared it with us on how it works.
I tried to simplify it because it is confusing. It can be confusing.
Well, a patent and a trademark is two different things as well, right, Gary?
Yes. Now, I don't know. See, one of my patents is actually in Canada. I get a Canadian patent, but they're international patents. It just happened to be approved through the Canadian Patent Office, and then 5 of them in the U.S. But in the U.S., the Patent and Trademark Office is the same government organization. They're just different divisions. And I developed this handling system. It's called True Bulk, TRU, capital BULK. Bulk was a company trademark system. And then you basically, other competitors use the same equipment, but they could not use our trademark name. So, for example, McDonald's hamburger, you can't, have a yellow sign up there with the arches and sell McDonald's hamburger because they have a trademark. It's not a patent. It's a trademark on that name, that design of the M. Well, we did the same thing with our True Bulk handling system.
Well, thanks for getting that information out there, because I know a lot of my listeners, they have questions and they want to know, right? And Miss Liz always gets those questions out for you guys, because I know that you're a little on the shy side sometimes, and you're like, Miss Liz, are you going to catch that? Are you going to get that out there for us? And of course I will.
You have an amazing audience and a very, very diverse audience. And so a lot of these, what I just commented on the last few minutes, maybe it went on too long, I apologize, but it would not be interesting to some. But I think others might find it very intriguing and help them develop their idea.
Well, and it's to get the awareness out there and get the right information out there, because there's so much false information out in the world today that we need to get the proper information out there.
Very good. Thank you for doing that.
Well, Gary, you gave me the word interested when I asked you to describe yourself as an individual. Why that word, interested?
I'm interested, as you probably can tell, I'm interested in a lot of things. I made my living in agriculture, in grains, but we were on a cattle farm. I bought my first 3 cars raising pigs. I mean, my whole life has been an interesting journey, and it's probably a word that's just stuck with me. There's always something else more interesting I got to figure out.
So, Gary, what was your first car that you bought yourself?
A 59 Pontiac.
Oh, nice car. Yeah, Miss Liz
Well,
is a car.
it was a 400 cubic inch, big old green car. It was all I could afford.
Green on top of it. Oh, awesome.
It cost me
my first car was a peacock green. I had a Cadillac.
Well, it was kind of like your Cadillac. It was probably like my 59 Pontiac, but that car was in its day. And of course, this was it was 10 years old when I bought it, but back then it was an old car. It had chrome. Everything was chrome inside. All the gauges were chrome across it didn't have chrome across the top. Now you would have to have padding up there because it was like a killer if you ever hit your head on it. But it was, to me, it was an amazing old 59 Pontiac with a bunch of chrome.
The cars back then, they were built solid. Like I
Never
really
saw it.
love old cars. Like if you want to make Miss Liz happy, take me to a car show. I'll be like, oh yes, that's like taking me out for ice cream. Like when I'm driving, I'm in the passenger side now because I don't drive anymore. But when I see an old car, I'm just like, oh, that is so nice.
Yeah. So I went from a 59 Pontiac to a 61 uh, uh, Bel Air, 60 Bel Air, I think it was, and a 61 Chevy Impala. So that was my first three cars as a teenager.
Oh wow, nice cars, nice picks.
And they would still be beauties today had I had them.
Oh my goodness, yeah, they would. You could always bring them back.
I'd have to find them. The 59 Pontiac is a rare car because uh, one, it had a big motor. Number two, it's too large to store. A lot of restorers like smaller cars, and it had a default with the rear end. They had trouble holding the body basically because it was so big. They had holding the body to the differential and the rear axle, and so they basically got crushed. The
Oh
other,
wow.
you mentioned green cars. I after that I bought a '71 Chevy Vega with not the hatchback. Almost all of them were hatchback. There were very few with actual trunk, so back window and a trunk. And so I had one of those. I have never ever seen one since. It's just
Oh
it's
wow.
like one of those cars that got destroyed, and they are rare.
Yeah, my car was really rare. My godfather gave it to me when I first got my license, and he's like, "This is my gift to you." And it was a peacock green Cadillac, and I was like, "Wow!" And it had all like the wood cravings and oh, like it. They don't
Yeah,
make that anymore. Now it's
What year
everything's
was that?
plastic, and
Do you remember what year the model was?
I'm not sure what the year was. I'd have to ask my
Because I'm
godfather.
I'm just my mind is running trying to imagine this wood paneling on. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
very
it
cool.
had nice wood paneling inside, and the color was a nice peacock green, like the feather, the peacock. Oh, it was
Well,
gorgeous. Everybody thought I was, and he just gave it to me just as a gift to me, and I'll always remember that. And all of the dashboard didn't work, so I had to learn how to drive blind. So nothing worked. He's
so
like,
you wouldn't speed. Yeah, yeah.
he's like, feel the gas, girl. And I had a heavy foot back then. So yeah. So it was pretty exciting. But that's how I learned how to drive was with my Peacock Cadillac. So
Now
yeah.
that had a stitch shift on the column, right?
Yes.
Yes,
And a big
because it didn't
wood
have.
the steering wheel was made out of wood too, I believe. Trying to
Yeah,
remember. Yeah, it was a big steering wheel. So it was a
yes.
big wheel for me as a little girl. So
Oh
but
yeah.
that's how I learned how to drive. Because I was like, nothing works. The numbers are not moving. He's like, it's all broken. You got to figure it out. Go with the feel, girl.
Well, that's an example where a parent, in this case a grandparent, had confidence in you that you would figure it out and gave you responsibility. That's a lot of things that we unfortunately take from kids. We don't want to give them a responsibility. And in my book, Learning, I say, well, if the first responsibility you give a kid is when they get out of college and expect them to be responsible, well, you're 20 years too late.
Yeah, yeah. You got to get them when they're young.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And in this
Gary, if
case, it
anybody
was
wanted, Gary, if anybody wanted to get your book, where could they get your book?
relating to ancients.com is you can get all my books, virtually all my books. The old one, it's available for free on researchgate.com. But relating to ancients.com is my website. I autograph it there. My New York distributor has my books through all the library systems, get them through Baker and Taylor or Ingram, wholesale, and then Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all those places can order my books. Obviously, if it comes through my website, I autograph it and send it out.
Well, that's
Now,
awesome. And thank you.
I should say that if I send it to Canada, being you're in Canada, it costs a lot to send a book uh, because of the postage, the
Yep.
UPS, FedEx, whatever. It's very costly. So my New York distributor has a system where she takes care of it, and I think my books are now on Amazon in Canada too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gary, for sitting and having tea with me. It was really amazing, and we went down history and had some memories pop up. And now I'm picturing my car, and I miss my car. You know, good
You miss
times,
the
good
old
memories,
days.
right?
Yes, they are. They are. We have to smile through life, and I think that's what makes life so enjoyable and makes life, as we talked about earlier, interesting. And so, if people, whether they're rural or city, use their resources and um, do a little research on your own, whether it's family matters or genealogy or a patent, as you talked about. It's
Yeah.
it's up to you. You can do lots of things. You don't have to rely on expecting somebody else to do that. Do it yourself.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Gary, for joining me. And thank you so much for the audience and listeners out there. I could not do this without all of you guys. So, all your support, all your questions, all of your likes and shares do make a difference in Miss Liz's life. I will be back on the 14th and 15th and 17th next week. So, it will be a busy week for me, but I have two returning guests that are returning. Laura Bellett's coming back with Science of Empowerment. She'll be talking about that. And then we have Ayana Davis coming back, and she'll be talking about autism as a Black woman and being diagnosed as an adult. And then we have couples. We have two returning couples that are coming back that are going to be talking about relationship and intimacy. That's what we're going to be talking about. And both couples have been married, I believe, over 30 years. So Miss Liz likes to bring the couples back. So I have a little bit of everything for everybody out there. So until next week, stay true, keep serving your tea, and just be yourselves. Miss Liz is watching, and I will reach out to you if I feel that you have a good cup of tea. I'd like to do a special shout out to Mickey Mickelson as well for giving me my tea time gift from this morning. From Michael McKay was this afternoon, and Gary is tonight, and they both come from Mickey Mickelson called Creative Edge. Mickey has amazing authors on there as well. And until then, I will see everybody next week, same time, same place, and we'll do this all over again.
Thank you, Liz, and Mickey, for Mickey Mickelson. Thank you for so much, Liz, for having me on.
It was a pleasure, Gary.